Hi you guys! So I know my channel's name is 5-Minute Conversations in History. I do talks about history, but today I want to take a step back from that. Don't worry, I'll be going back to those, you history nerds out there like me. But today I want to talk about something that's a little bit more personal, at least to me. I want to talk about Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. My neurologist calls it Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, so if you're looking for the right pronunciation, I'm not the person to give it to you. I'm going to say Ehlers, and specifically I'm going to be talking about the hypermobile type. Now with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, there's 13 different types. I personally have the hypermobile type, so that's what I'm going to be speaking on. So what I want to talk about today, and I'll do a couple other videos like this, just talking about my own experience with Ehlers-Danlos. What I want to say though, just like out there before I do any more talking, just because I have symptoms and you have the same symptoms or something similar doesn't necessarily mean that you have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I have a ton of doctors. I can list them off. I have a rheumatologist, neurologist, cardiologist, gastroenterologist, urologist, and that's not even skimming the surface. I have a ton. So like I'm saying, just because I got something going on with me that you said, that sounds familiar, doesn't necessarily mean that it's Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And then on the other side of that too, is if you are someone with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, you know that no two of us zebras are going to have the same experience. And why I'm using the word zebra, for those of you who aren't familiar, there is a phrase out there that's doctors are trained to hear when they hear hoofbeats, when the symptoms are there, they're trained to look for horses. Common things that they see very frequently. They're not trained to see zebras, uncommon condition like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So my experience with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, I was always the flexible child. In gymnastics, I could lay on my stomach and like wrap my feet around and tap my ears with my feet, all while laying on my stomach. Always sitting in the weird positions, extremely flexible. Like, I don't know if you can see, I'm left-handed, so it's weird. But this one right here is a very common one. I can touch both of my thumbs to my wrists. I wouldn't recommend doing some of your party tricks because showing off the thumb one doesn't hurt me, but some of my other things, showing off my flexibility does hurt me now. So like I said, I'll show you the thumb one, I'll show you the thumb to my forearm. Other ones I can, flat hand, if I'm touching my toes, I can touch my palm flat to the ground. My knees hyperextend, my elbows hyperextend. Just overall very flexible. Ehlers-Danlos is a connective tissue disorder, but beyond like just the childhood flexibility, I was always sick too, which was really interesting and something I hadn't really thought about. Some other individuals with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome had brought it to my attention. A lot of us had like strep as a kid, strep or tonsillitis, or we're just chronically sick. Could be due to the autoimmune disorders or autoimmune impacts of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Some of us also do develop autoimmune disorders. I am personally in the workup for one. I'm not going to share the name right now. If something happens and it is officially diagnosed, I'll share it then. But a lot of us have these comorbid conditions. We'll talk about comorbid conditions a little bit later. Just like overall sense of flexibility, not necessarily having the best immune systems. When I was 21 years old, I got my tonsils taken out, which is not quite common to have them taken out at that time, but I had strep 9 times in a row. When I was 17 years old, I was a competitive swimmer, and I swam for my high school, and one day I was doing backstroke. It's the one where you're laying on your back, and like your arm goes back here, and I just felt like this really intense pain in my shoulder. It took me 2 years. Constant doctors. I had over a dozen MRIs. I had CT scans. I went to physical therapy 3 times a week for 2 years. I got to know my physical therapist very well. He sends me Christmas cards now. But it's one of those things where it's like, okay, something's wrong. Swimming should not have caused. And what it ended up being, I completely ripped 2 muscles off my scapula, and a third was hanging on by just a thread, to the point that my surgeon said that he watched it detach as he opened up the shoulder. So I completely detached 3 muscles in my shoulder. So I had to have I was 19, so at 17 this injury happened. At 19 years old, I had to have scapular reattachment surgery. That was big. It was crazy for me. I was 19. It's like, oh crap. Big surgery, major surgery. And then things kind of settled down for a bit. It was good. It was pretty quiet. And then May of 2020 hit. So we were mid-pandemic. It was not really doing a ton. I was going for walks. I was working. And then just one day out of the blue, I was at work and I worked at a home improvement store. I was at work and I used my hands a lot and I just couldn't feel them. One day out of the blue, nothing, I wasn't doing anything abnormal. I just lost complete sensation in my hands. And this was 2020, middle of the pandemic. Did I say 2022 earlier? It was 2020. And it's 2024 now. I still don't have sensation in my hands. And when I say I don't have sensation in my hands, like if I take my hand and I squeeze it, I can feel pressure. But I've sliced it before, paper cut it. I once took a pretty good piece of my finger out when I was cutting. Didn't feel that. Not necessarily, I don't feel pain, I feel pressure. I don't feel heat. I'm a teacher and I subbed in a science classroom once and the kids were doing something with boiling water. And without really thinking, something had been dropped in the boiling water and I just went and plucked it out and the kids all stared at me like, it's like, and I didn't feel it. I'm like, oh no, don't do that. Because it's like, I didn't feel it, but I didn't want the kids mimicking it either. So that was in 2020. And I go to my neurologist because I had already been established with the neurologist because of my shoulder issue. And I'm like, what is going on? I can't feel my hands. Like, it's weird. I had numbness and tingling going up on my fingers. I started bruising really easy. And I did bruise easy as a kid, but it started intensifying. And I don't know if you can see it very well. I do get just like random bruises. So I got some on my forearm right now. I got some on this forearm right here. I started breaking out in like just random rashes. When I graduated college, I was very upset because about a month before graduation, I just like erupted in a full body, just like it looked like a pimply, sandpapery, just like uncomfortable, awful rash. And that's when they started thinking that I had some sort of autoimmune. I had a compromised autoimmune system. They started doing genetic tests. I went to 3 different hospitals in my area. I was in and out of the emergency room a lot. I just had a lot of things going downhill at one time. And it wasn't just like, oh no, I can't feel my hands. That's my main issue. It went from I can't feel my hands to now I have this full body rash. There was one day I ended up in the emergency room because I started having these like full body twitches and spasms and they just wouldn't stop. And all throughout this time, my doctors were completely stumped. They started testing me. I have family history of multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's, so they started testing me for those. They started testing me for other autoimmune disorders. They started testing me for muscular disorders, anything that they could really think of. And then I went to see my rheumatologist, and he asked me if I had ever heard of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I had not. As soon as I left, I pulled up my phone and I'm like, oh goodness. And the weird thing about Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is it's not going to be the same. Like I'm saying, my experience might be completely different than yours. You're not going to talk to 2 of us with this disorder and we're going to have, or this syndrome, and we're going to have the same symptoms. It's going to be different for all of us. So I'm Googling it. And of course in my head, it's like, okay, this sounds like me, check. This sounds like me, okay. This doesn't sound like me. Of course I don't got it. This one's not me. It doesn't sound like me. In the end, we did some genetic testing to rule out some of the other different types of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And in October of last year, I was diagnosed with the hypermobile type. We've since gone ups and downs since then. They're suspecting that I have what is known as the trifecta of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, the hypermobile type, which is having the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and then having postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, POTS, which is just like I stand, blood pools to my feet, my heart rate goes up, my blood pressure stays pretty low, which doctors were a little bit confused in that one at first. And I've passed out fully once. A lot of times, like I get spots in my vision, I get really dizzy, I'm scared of passing out. So as soon as I start thinking I'm going to, like I'm on the floor with my feet up. They also think I have what is known as mast cell activation syndrome. Those rashes I was talking about, they say that is a big cause of those. And I'm also, like I mentioned, in the workup for an autoimmune disorder that has to do with my GI system. I have been on a lot of interesting diets. So, in an effort to control the mast cell and the GI issues I got going on, I have been off gluten for 9 months. I miss bread. I have been off dairy. I've been off acids like tomatoes and pasta sauce. So, it's all these things where it's like, okay, one thing's going wrong. Now it's going wrong. And the thing about Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, it's a genetic disorder. And because of that, there is no really treatment. There is no cure for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It is going to be symptomatic. So I used to wake up, and this is a little bit embarrassing, but I'm going to share it with you guys anyway. I used to wake up 13, 14, 15 times a night because my bladder would just feel really full and I'd have to go to the bathroom. They say it has to do with the autonomic dysfunction. All my systems kind of going like, all symptoms are very, very hyperactive for me. So instead of being able to cure Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, they have to treat that if it was its own isolated problem. Same with the GI issues. I started having right upper quadrant abdomen pain in November. So it's to a GI doctor, gastroenterologist. And they're working on their side of things, trying to figure it out. There's just no one, like they can't just like snap their fingers, they can't click their heels together and it's going to be healed. And why I wanted to talk about this today is Ehlers-Danlos syndrome doesn't really get a lot of attention. And going through the medical process of getting diagnosed is really, really hard. I will be honest with you guys, it's one of the most mentally taxing things that you can go through. Getting diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, I read it's different for everybody. Like I said, when I first presented to my neurologist with my loss of sensation in my hands, it took about 4 years for me to get a diagnosis. And at my age, 4 years felt like 4 years too many. I wanted to go to the doctor and be diagnosed immediately. But I've read it takes people, the average time to get an Ehlers-Danlos diagnosis is 20 years. And we need to change that. A lot of things too I've seen since getting my diagnosis. I went to see, which doctor was it? I went to see my cardiologist. And I told him I am being referred to you because I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and they're suspecting I have the comorbid condition known as POTS. He knew what POTS was because it can be caused by other things as well. But then he asked me to repeat the condition like 3 separate times. And he goes, okay, can you spell it for me? And as I'm spelling it for him, he has his phone out in Google and he's typing in Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And I'm not expecting every doctor to know. Like, I'm not expecting every single person that say, yes, this is what I have, to just automatically be like, yes, I know what this is. But it happens a lot. I was at my neurologist yesterday and we were talking. Ehlers-Danlos does not have a lot of research behind it, and I'm hoping that one day we'll be able to change that. So I want to start talking, along like what I said, like my history conversations. I do want to talk about my experience with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, because like no two of us are going to have the same experience, but I hope that by me sharing my experience with the disorder, what I'm going through with it, I keep saying disorder, with the syndrome, it's so much, it's a lot. I'm still getting used to talking about it. I haven't really told a lot of people. I told my immediate circle, and I'm at the point now that I'm tired of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome not getting the respect that it deserves. I've told people that I have it, and they're like, oh, so it's in your head? No, it's in my connective tissues, but thank you. So I think it's time, and I want to use a platform, and I know I don't have a big platform, but anywhere that we can get out there, it's worth it. So that's what I'm going to start doing. Along with my history nerd videos, I'm going to talk about some of my ins and outs, some of the things that you experience. I'll talk about some of my doctor's appointments, some of my symptoms, maybe even talk about like just day-to-day life. Like I said, different for everybody, but us zebras got to stick together. So you guys have a good day. Stay positive, stay happy, stay healthy, stay hydrated, and just keep going. Don't stop.